In case you're new here, Journey Clinical is a platform and a community for therapists to offer psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy into their private practice, starting with ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, which is what is legal and available in all 50 states today. Journey Clinical's in-house medical team handles the eligibility, the prescription, and the outcome monitoring, while therapists who are in private practice, such as yourselves, support their clients directly through a series of preparation, dosing, and integration sessions. So something really important and unique about Journey Clinical is that KAP is always delivered within the context of a therapeutic alliance. So there's always a psychotherapist working with a client who's experiencing KAP treatment. And it's also worth mentioning that we have a medication management program. So our medical team can prescribe other psychiatric medications depending on the needs of your client. And also, we're very proud to have a growing list of insurance providers across the country, making KAP more accessible. So, that being said, we're going to kick off with some intros of our lovely panelists. So, we're going to hear from 3 therapists who have integrated KAP into their private practice, as well as Sam, who is a member of our medical team. So, we can kick off maybe with Kayla.
Hi there. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where everyone is. My name is Kayla Knopf. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I am based in San Diego in California. I'm the co-founder of Enamory along with Dr. Chandra Khalifian. We founded Enamory specifically to focus on couples and psychedelics. So we have a clinical practice, we have a training institute where we also help other therapists get started working with KAP with couples. And we have a research foundation where we are working on fundraising for some couples and psychedelics research studies so that we can learn more about what works.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shweta Mittal. I'm a clinical psychologist in New York City. One of my jobs, I work with first responders, also do some integration and preparation work around Spravato and ketamine there. And in my private practice, I work with a lot of folks holding different identities, but often people who are ethically non-monogamous or are kink identified, among other things. And I do provide KAP in my private practice also from a sex-positive, trauma-informed lens.
Hi, I'm Amy Wilhelmy. I'm based in the Chicagoland area. I am a marriage and family therapist for 15 years. I see primarily couples. I also do divorce mediation in my practice, and I am very much on my way to be a certified sex therapist. I just have to turn in my paperwork, and I'm also completing a PhD in clinical sexology. So I'm interested in kind of the integration of KAP and divorce, and also KAP and sex therapy.
Hi there, my name is Sam Stray. I am a psychiatric nurse practitioner here in Wisconsin. I serve patients in Wisconsin and also Ohio. I do also have my own KAP practice and work with typically trauma patients, and I also work closely with substance use disorders, working with relationships as well, but not necessarily specializing in some of these amazing things that our therapists do. So I'm very excited to learn from you all.
Wonderful. We're going to kick off with something that I love to hear from our therapists, which is a case study about how KAP changed how one of your clients or patients related to this topic of sex, intimacy, or their relationship, and what shifted because of it. I think I'll kick off with you, Sam, to share a little bit, and you can kind of opine on the medical perspective of what's happening also in the brain to help with this shift.
Absolutely. So I recently worked with this woman. She was about 60 years old, history of depression and anxiety. I would say the majority of our prep work revolved around discussing her relationship with her husband, who was suffering from some significant medical conditions. So she's in quite a bit of a caretaker role. And so a lot of our prep work was spent kind of discussing him and how she kind of navigates their relationship and kind of wanting this deeper intimacy and deeper connection, but really struggling to get there with him. And what was really interesting that happened in session. So session itself was pretty quiet. There was this one part where she actually experienced a feeling of moving backwards and then kind of shooting forward. She said it felt like being on a roller coaster almost. Didn't really know what that meant in the moment, but as we moved into integration the following day, the unfolding of how this experience was for her was really, really interesting. Um, so kind of what happened in integration and part of what ketamine does from a little bit of a medical perspective is it can allow patients to have a decreased amygdala activation and create psychological distancing, which can allow for reframing of certain aspects of someone's story. So, due to this, she felt compelled in integration to actually share about past sexual violations in childhood and adulthood. She stated a few times, like, I can't believe this is coming out. Like, I've never actually even shared this with my therapist. So she felt really surprised by the defenses kind of softening for her to be able to share this. Um, and so there can be this weakening of some of these rigid predictive coding, which leads to less narrative rigidity and cognitive flexibility, which is part of what allowed her to feel, okay to share this information with us. So through this experience, she was actually able to recognize the way that past violations from men had impacted her current partnership. So she's someone who got married later in life in her 50s, because she was kind of always afraid of these relationships with men. And so, in being able to recognize how these violations have impacted her today, she was able to sort of untangle these with her current partner. And like I said, she had that feeling of pulling back and pushing forward. It was almost like she was like, I needed to step back and look at these other parts so that I could move forward in my current partnership. Um, she, we followed up a few months later and she reported increased flexibility with her partner. She said she was actually able to be more vulnerable while recognizing his current capacity. So, kind of learning that maybe there's certain parts that she's not going to necessarily be able to access yet with him, and being able to approach that with compassion and non-judgment versus feeling like, just really frustrated and I don't know what to do. I don't know how this is going to work. How am I going to move forward? She's actually had a lot of increased flexibility with him. And so this also gave her more material to do some trauma work with her current therapist, so that she could kind of process some of these things that she really hasn't for many, many years. And so when we think about like kind of what's happening in the brain, how did we get here? So ketamine works with NMDA receptors and glutamate. So there's an NMDA blockade, a glutamate surge, which ultimately results in more plasticity. So ketamine can temporarily loosen the rigid synaptic patterns and promote the growth of new connections. Very different from our SSRIs, which work more gradually through monoamines. We can also think about the default mode network, which the default mode network is self-referential thinking, rumination, narrative identity, ego continuity, depression-related looping. And so ketamine helps decrease the hyperconnectivity in the default mode network, and temporarily weakens the rigid predictive coding models. So what does this look like? Less narrative rigidity, less of this is who I am and this is who I always will be. And patients can often describe this as I could see my trauma from outside of myself. It didn't feel like me anymore. I wasn't fused with the story anymore. So this isn't just psychological, it's a literal reflection of network disintegration and reintegration. So ketamine also dampens amygdala reactivity, enhances prefrontal modulation, and creates a window of emotional ability with reduced defensive rigidity. So memory can be then reconsolidated with new emotional associations. Shame can shift to compassion. Fear can shift to meaning. And so one way you can kind of describe this to your patients is kind of saying ketamine can temporarily quiet the part of the brain that keeps you stuck in your story and increases the brain's ability to form new connections. And during that window, we can help your brain reorganize around new meaning. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam, and thank you for giving that language as well. It's so important to take these concepts and translate it into language that clients can connect with. It's really helpful. And thank you for sharing that story. So I'll ask Kayla to go next and just share a case study from your practice and a memory.
Sure. That's yeah, I love that language too. And I think that really connects to the case example that I was thinking of. When I work with couples, in my practice, we really emphasize first and foremost understanding where they're getting stuck. And so often that has to do with these really rigid stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves and our partners. And we can kind of map out for them, right, like this loop that they get stuck in. And so I was working with a couple who came to see me for a ketamine intensive where we do preparation, dosing, integration over the course of a weekend, and helping them identify their presenting issue was this is a non-monogamous couple and they'd sort of had like a threesome experience gone wrong. And we're trying to sort of move themselves out of the place of pain around it, but they kept getting stuck in this cycle that made it really difficult for them to discuss. It made it really difficult for them to talk about it. And so they were just stuck in a lot of pain. And every time something would happen in their life that would sort of evoke a memory of this experience or bring it to the forefront, they would just get really stuck in the same pattern, where she would feel sort of this immense kind of guilt and shame come up around a story of, I've screwed this up. I can't get it right. Nothing that I do is making this better, feeling really hopeless about that. And so this would really kind of trigger this like attachment panic in her, right? And she would reach for her partner. This is a very sort of classically pursuing move for folks who work with couples. She would move toward him in a way that felt really intense, right? And could look even angry. And for him, meanwhile, he's sort of feeling like his pain isn't feeling heard and understood. He's feeling really unseen and just sort of not safe, right, to show up in the relationship and be vulnerable. And so he's pulling back, right? He is moving away from the conflict that feels so painful, that feels like he's not being seen. The more he pulls back, the more she panics and moves toward him. And the more she moves toward him, the more he feels unsafe and pulls back. And they were just getting so stuck there. And so we identified that in preparation for them. I think helping a couple understand where they're getting stuck is a really essential part of preparation when doing relational ketamine work. And they were really able to see, and I think they both felt very validated by sort of seeing that cycle mapped out for them and going like, yes, that is what it feels like. That's where we're getting stuck. And so then we did the ketamine dosing session with both of them together in the same room with a psychedelic dose, the full strength dose of sublingual ketamine. And they were able to really sink into a lot of empathy for themselves and for their partner in that experience. And so then when we started to move into integration and process the experience, for the first time, each partner was able to feel their own stories and defenses get quiet and move out of the way enough for them to really tune in and hear their partner's experience. They were both able to listen to each other and hear each other. And they started that in the integration phase immediately after the ketamine session. And I'm now working with them doing outpatient couples therapy, which is why I love this model so much of ketamine being embedded in a therapy framework, because now we can continue this really good work. And now they're able to have conversations about this painful experience, this sort of attachment rupture that they experienced. And we're able to move through kind of a trauma processing framework with the both of them, where they can tell the story of what happened, see it in a new light, kind of reprocess, right, that story in a more helpful one that makes room for both partners' perspectives, for holding a lot of empathy for one another. And now they're able to actually tolerate those conversations in order to do the therapeutic work to heal this rupture and move forward. So it's been a really beautiful experience. I'm still working with them. We're kind of midway through this process, but I have been really, really loving this process with this couple. It's been wonderful. Whenever Chandra and I give talks, one of the first questions we always get is, do you really want to be working with MDMA? Is ketamine just sort of like a replacement for MDMA for now? And although, yes, we are very eager to be able to work with all psychedelic medicines, I think ketamine is so underappreciated for its power and potential to do relational healing work. I think that's the thing that has surprised me most, is that more people are not really focusing in, in the academic research space on ketamine for couples. And so we're really trying to, generate more interest in this among academic researchers so that we can learn more about how this works and what the best practices are and how we can help more folks heal their relationships with ketamine.
I'll totally agree with what everyone's saying. Like, I think ketamine's relational impact is so underestimated. Especially when I work with so many clients who have a lot of trauma and looking at their relationship with themselves and how that shows up. I found that ketamine really helps with that. And you'll see that in the example that I'm sharing. So I had a client in his mid-30s in an ethically non-monogamous long-term relationship. He had been with his partner for almost 10 years, and they had moved to New York a few years ago. And they were navigating changes in their relationship around the fact that his partner had a new partner, and the new partner, the way that relationship was unfolding was really impacting how the client saw himself. And then he had a really big loss. This client had a history of being groomed by somebody in the family who was very close to him. And so lots of feelings of betrayal and difficulty trusting people, long history of, he didn't come see me for therapy, only for KAP, but he was with his primary therapist for a long time working on PTSD and treatment-resistant depression. So he was really interested in the impact ketamine can have in shifting his view. He had made the decision after his father died, and he realized that his partner couldn't show up for him in the ways that he was hoping to. And this was he was supposedly the primary and cohabitating partner. And so when his partner couldn't show up to support him in the wake of his father's death, he really felt betrayed. And he had a really hard time figuring out what he did wrong, why his partner couldn't show up for him. He had made the decision to move out and was really struggling with, am I doing the right thing here? And he really didn't see any value that he was bringing to anything. And so I think for him, we did 3 or 4 ketamine sessions about a month apart each before he stopped coming in. And even after the first session, he had this really big experience of being able to center in himself and see the value that he could have in himself, and that he deserved a partner who would communicate more effectively and show up for him in the ways that he showed up for them. He shared examples of ways he showed up for his metamor, his partner's partner, in their polycule, and was trying to do like family-oriented support, and how it wasn't always reciprocated. It was often not reciprocated, and he was made to feel like the bad guy for speaking up and asking for what he needed. So he learned to not ask for what he needed. And so I think he felt more firm in his decision, and really looking at it as, I do deserve more. And this relationship might not be the primary relationship in my life and the place where I find my home. He was able to kind of become more settled in his new apartment, feel firm about that decision to move out and settle into himself as a more grounded place for home, as he was navigating where he wanted this relationship to fall. And that also, it created some friction in the relationship, because he had gotten into this pattern of relationships in the past too, where he kind of went along with whatever the other person wanted. And so it was a big shift for his partner to understand that he was going to stand firm in what he wanted for himself and not automatically give in to everything that they wanted or what their partner wanted. And I think because he was a cisgendered white man, he often felt like, and his partners had other identities, he often felt like he wasn't able to hold his needs and importance. and that he felt a lot of his needs were invalidated for a number of reasons. And I think he was able to stay firm in that and ask. And so that was kind of the big takeaway for him, is that he could value himself and then actually ask for what he needed in a more supported way, a more grounded way. And his therapist actually gave feedback after the first session, because he came back to me for the second KAP session saying his therapist noticed a huge difference in his confidence and his ability to believe and challenge some of his negative thoughts in a way that he was amazed by. So I think his therapist became a big proponent of KAP after this first session too.
That's really interesting, Shweta. And I think it's really interesting for everyone to hear this example where you're supporting a client who does have a primary therapist. Oftentimes there may be therapists who have a client may be supported by KAP, but they don't offer it. And so they'll often refer that client to a Journey Clinical member who will support them through preparation, dosing, and integration. The Journey Clinical therapist always supports with the preparation and the integration, but they can collaborate then back with that primary therapist to support the client. And then whenever appropriate, the client can just continue to work with their primary therapist. So that's an option for working with this model. And I also wanted to ask you, Shweta, about your talk you gave. I think you might have given even more than one talk at Psychedelic Science this past summer. And I know, Kayla, you spoke there too. And it was a really wonderful time. And maybe some of our audience here was able to make it out to that, but I'm sure many of us weren't. So I would just be curious, Shweta, to hear about some of the conversations. I think you were on a couple panels there that you had, and any takeaways from that that you would like to share with us today.
Thank you. And thank you, Kayla. Your talk was really great too. I go to all of them at other places too. So what I spoke about was BDSM. For people who might not know, it's bondage. It's an acronym that stands for like kinky non-normative sexual behavior focused on bondage, discipline, dominance and submission, and sadism and masochism. And essentially, I think a lot of people put BDSM in this category of that kinky, hot, sexy thing you do in the bedroom, and that's it. And it's actually quite more than that for a lot of people, especially when they get involved in community. So I think the big takeaway, and this was I've been talking a lot in a lot of different venues about the overlap between psychedelic space and kinky healing space. And if you've ever read the Queering Psychedelics book, there's like a chapter that alludes to that and talks about the intersections of BDSM and psychedelics. And some of it is when you think about the different reasons people turn to BDSM are some of the same things we talk about when we come to somatic healing. We talk about the power of being in your body very mindfully, without judgment, without the negative stories and narratives that go through your mind. There's this altered headspace that people can get into, whether it's a sense of flow or, the fancy word is transient hypofrontality for people who are bottoming, which is often like this spacey place where you're disconnected and very firmly in the moment, where you're feeling all the things without thinking about all the things. So mindful embodiment is another way of thinking about it. And so there is a lot of articles that talk across, like whether it's psychedelic worlds or other spaces, that talk about altered states as healing. And then there's a piece of community feeling very connective and finding, I think a queer community talks about this a lot. I think people think that BDSM is this heteronormative white space, and it is not. There are lots of intersections. It's a very queer space where people do explore with ideas of gender and sexuality in ways that maybe don't seem possible in the heteronormative world. So there's a lot of queerness in kink. And there's a lot of people who actually use kink as a way to purposely connect with spirituality and healing. And so the big takeaway for me was labeling BDSM as a type of medicine, because the talk was on sex and psychedelics. So everybody wanted to jump to, well, how do we mix all of it together? And the big takeaway was, well, you kind of can, but very carefully, right? Like if you're talking about mixing different medicines, you have to know how you react to one medicine and then the other, and then be very careful about combining them. So sex is also a type of medicine, right? Your connection to your body and how you connect with other people through that, and the healing that can happen in the physicality and touch. And so when you bring BDSM into it, you're playing with edges. And so you have to be careful. So if you're mixing psychedelics, sex, and BDSM, those are like 3 different medicines you have to navigate. And so some of it is there's a lot of different growth and expansion that can happen in a lot of different ways that our Western model doesn't really look at. And so part of what I've been focusing on is decolonizing my practice and really thinking about this more expansive way of looking at things, especially when we're working with people.
Thank you so much, Rita. That really adds a lot to this conversation. Appreciate it. I'm gonna move on to Amy's case study next. And just so everyone knows, after this, we're gonna ask some questions to all the panelists, but if you have questions yourself, feel free to use the chat and put those in there so that we can address those as well. So over to you, Amy.
Yeah, I just have a quick comment about the research that is happening, or maybe not happening as much as we'd like it to. I teach at a major university in the graduate school, and at least our emerging therapists are very interested in it. I can't tell you how much I talk about it and how much questions I get from students. So I feel like the researchers are coming. So that's just good news there. Okay, so my case study is Laura. She is a 42-year-old person, 15-year marriage, 2 children. I'm going to be talking about kind of divorce and how we worked through that. So 8 months after her divorce, she just wasn't grieving a relationship. Oftentimes it's a trauma response, right? So she really felt like she had lost herself. A lot of people in divorce feel like, my identity is really shattered. She described, I failed at my marriage. I'm undesirable. I don't know who I am without being someone else's wife. And traditional talk therapy kind of helped her understand some of the relational dynamics, but emotionally she remained really stuck. And then her grief quickly turned into shame. Sadness triggered panic, and this reflection on her marriage really kind of spiraled into self-criticism, like, what did I do wrong? How could I have done things differently? It's all my fault, right? So KAP, when we introduced KAP as an option, after we've kind of, did as much systemic therapy work as we could, helped her just kind of process the grief more safely and loosen those rigid kind of identity narratives that she had, and really reconnect with her embodied sense of self, which was separate from her identity in the marriage. So before KAP, Laura really avoided deep emotions because it overwhelmed her. When sadness surfaced, it immediately fused with thoughts like, I ruined this, or I wasn't enough. And during KAP sessions, she was really able to process and access this grief without emotional flooding. She described feeling sadness kind of move through her body rather than collapse or overwhelm her. In one session, she said, it wasn't all my fault. That relationship had limits. And this really marked a critical shift in our work from this kind of global self-blame to this relational complexity, right? The grief didn't disappear, but it became tolerable. And so this compassion emerged, which is so beautiful to witness, where shame kind of once dominated that space. Instead of saying, I failed, she began saying the relationship ended or it shifted, but I am still whole and I am still me. So post-divorce, Laura's identity felt very hollow. She didn't really have a sense of self. Her sense of self had been fused with roles like wife or mediator or caregiver or sexual partner. And then she carried these beliefs like, I'm bad at relationships. I'm too much. I'm never going to be loved. I always get abandoned. And in this expanded state during KAP, Laura experienced herself outside of the marriage narrative. It was like she was able to kind of separate from that. She reconnected with her parts of herself that felt independent and creative and playful and assertive. And she later shared, I feel like me again, not just someone who got left. So as these rigid stories kind of loosened, she became more curious about her needs outside of the relationship, her own values. This shame softened. We increased this flexibility, and she began to be able to imagine the future again, without assuming failure. She was able to kind of drop that story about failure and think about the future. And then after the divorce, she also alternated between kind of sexual shutdown and seeking validation. Intimacy got kind of wonky for a moment. It either felt really threatening or performative. Like she wasn't really in her body in a lot of those experiences, which is true of any kind of trauma, right? So KAP actually helped reduce body shame. It helped soften the trauma responses that were related to rejection. She reported kind of feeling more present in her body and less preoccupied with how she would be perceived. And then over time, this anxiety about desirability kind of shifted into curiosity, into desire, into playfulness. And she reflected that my sexuality feels like it belongs to me now, not a role, not being chosen, it's mine. So it kind of moved from approval seeking to self-expression, which is the space in sexuality work that we really want people to land, right? So outcomes after several months were it reduced rumination and self-blame. It increased emotional tolerance. It created this greater self-compassion, it was more coherent, and she was able to have this kind of like flexible identity, healthier pacing and boundaries around dating, reconnection to this beautiful embodied sexuality. And she later summarized her experience like this: the divorce broke my life story, but KAP helped me realize that I am still the author. I don't know if you guys can see this behind me, but I have this thing in my office, which is so amazing that she said it, but it says, I trust the next chapter because I know the author. And you could really see this like knowing, this embodiment that she was able to have at the end, which is really beautiful. So some takeaways which you could share with your clients as far as divorce and kind of KAP in post-divorce work is that divorce is really an identity disruption. I've said that for a million years, even before I've started working with KAP, right? It's not just a relationship loss, it's this shift in identity. And so the biggest shift is reframing it from breakup recovery to kind of this identity reorganization. Clients aren't really only grieving their partner, they're also grieving a future fantasy, a role-based identity, sexual validation, attachment security, and this version of themselves that existed inside the marriage. So how KAP helped this client? You could explain it like this, and I can also put it in the chat if that would be helpful, but ketamine doesn't erase your pain. It changes your relationship to it. It often creates enough psychological space that you can really feel grief without being overwhelmed and question identity stories that really feel fixed. So in her case, it reduced emotional avoidance. It interrupted this self-blame loop. It increased this cognitive and identity flexibility. It created this distance from rigid narratives and increased self-compassion access, reduced shame-driven reactivity. Instead of being fused with like, I failed, clients can observe that the relationship ended. What does that mean to me? What does that mean about me? And is that story true? And often clients ask, who am I now? And you might say, right now, your identity is really tightly wrapped around this marriage story. But CAP can help sometimes people experience themselves separate from that role. You know, the more that you hear people talk about CAP, that's a very similar storyline, is that we're able to just kind of separate. We're not erasing the past, but we're able to kind of lose a grip on it. So that's it.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you all for sharing these case studies. As we know, CAP is not a silver bullet. And in light of this conversation specifically about relationships, have you ever had clients or worked with folks for whom CAP increased relational tension at first? And how did you help navigate?
I think a fear that a lot of people have when approaching ketamine work or thinking about other kind of psychedelic work more broadly is this going to sort of make me confront something, you know, that's going to really make me shift my life all around, right? And that's certainly a fear that sometimes I hear from people's partners when their partner or spouse is about to engage in a ketamine journey. And I'm reminded often of that. I don't know where this comes from, but there's that saying about therapy that therapy is not for feeling better, it's for getting better at feeling. And I think that really just captures this idea that what we want to help our clients do is reduce the extent to which they are avoiding and not sort of taking ownership, right, over their own kind of internal experiences. And often that's what's keeping us stuck, right? What's keeping us stuck is our desire to avoid the painful stuff, the hard stuff, to avoid taking a hard look at ourselves and our interests and our needs and wants. And so when working with couples in relationships, often like folks will sometimes come into my practice at a sort of apparently kind of peaceful place in their relationship, which is sort of this fragile stability built on the top of a lot of dysfunction that's under the rug. And so part of what we have to do first is take away the rug and see what's under there. And that can often feel, when we start to reduce the avoidance there, that can often feel like we're increasing conflict and increasing difficulty at first, but it's so essential, right? I use metaphors that I'm sure we all use in our practice. Like it's like sort of flushing out a wound, right? We need to sort of be able to heal what's there under the surface in order to build something strong going forward. And so I think that's a really helpful framework to prep clients for that. I don't think about it like things getting worse before they get better. I think about we are able to reduce our avoidance of the important, difficult things and really directly work with that in order to heal.
Any other thoughts before we move on to the next question? Thank you both for that. Okay. So I also wanted to ask you about we talked a little bit about couples CAP, right? So where the protocol where the couple is going through preparation, dosing, and integration together. But we've also mentioned instances where someone is working one-on-one with you directly, but a lot of the content that they're working on you with you is related to their relationship. So I would be curious about what type of support that non-participating partner may need, or what type of information about CAP they might need to be looped into this experience that their partner is having that may be quite transformative. So, how have you seen a CAP impact a partner where their relationship where there only one partner does CAP? Any thoughts on that question?
I mean, I just have a general comment that as a couples therapist, you know, if one person's kind of doing individual work, whether it be CAP or non-CAP, it's always a good idea for maybe the other person to seek individual therapy or modalities as well. I mean, I think that, you know, we can do relational work, but it's always helpful if both, you know, are engaging in their own journeys. And a lot of the times it's at the same time that the That the couples work is being done. So, I mean, that's my comment. But as far as like supporting a partner whose partner is going through CAP, I think we just use psychoeducation. You know, we invite partners in if the partner that is experiencing the CAP wants them to be involved or not. But oftentimes in CAP, you know, we have partners that are involved in ways, you know, if we're doing virtual CAP, maybe they're the assistant at home, or maybe if it's in person, they are the driver because we do need someone to pick them up from the office. So usually they are brought in at some point and have kind of some psychoeducation about like, what are we doing and how is this going to affect my partner and what might they experience? I think just out of care and concern. So.
Yeah, I think whenever possible, even if only one person is sort of doing the medicine journey, incorporating partners into some aspect of preparation and integration can be really, really helpful if that's something that the patient wants. It can be helpful not only for the patient to be able to share their experience and get empathic support from the partner, but also for the partner to sort of have a better grounding of understanding what their partner has gone through. So if that's something that both folks are willing to do, I find that super valuable, regardless of who's sort of doing the dosing.
Great. Thank you all very much. And just for a little piece of info for those of you who aren't aware, couples CAP is one modality, one-on-one, in-person, and remote is also a possibility. We also have a lot of therapists who host groups and retreats, and the ratio there is going to always be one therapist to 4 clients, but many therapists will team up with one another to host a larger retreat, and those can take place in all sorts of locations. We have some therapists here who I know host really epic retreats around very beautiful locations. We covered a lot of ground, I think. And if you liked this talk today and you got some things out of it, you can also register or subscribe to our Luma account, which is how you'll make sure to hear about upcoming events. We have mixes of virtual webinars and also local community events. Again, I'm always promoting getting together with your community and connecting with other therapists locally. It can be really, really supportive.